"Can I borrow you for one day?" The maid's little daughter asked the mafia boss in front of everyone what could lead to such an unexpected question, and how might a single moment like this change everything for those who witnessed it. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. If you enjoy heartfelt stories filled with emotion, dignity, and unforgettable moments, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new episode. Thank you for spending your time with us and for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, if you witnessed this moment, what would your first reaction be? Now, settle in as we step into a story where one simple question is about to leave an entire room in stunned silence. He believed that nothing could surprise him anymore, until one innocent question made an entire ballroom forget how to breathe. Crystal chandeliers spilled warm golden light across the grand ballroom of the Romano Foundation's annual charity gala, where politicians, business leaders, and the city's wealthiest families drifted through polished marble floors with glasses of sparkling cider and carefully rehearsed smiles. Every camera seemed drawn toward Lorenzo De Luca, the 40-year-old businessman whose calm confidence filled every corner of the room without a single raised voice. Dressed in a perfectly tailored black tuxedo, with silver threads just beginning to appear at his temples, he stood surrounded by board members thanking him for another year of record-breaking donations to children's hospitals and community housing programs. His reputation carried a quiet gravity. People spoke carefully when he entered a room, not because he demanded attention, but because his presence somehow commanded it naturally. Across the ballroom, almost invisible among the elegantly dressed guests, Amara Johnson adjusted the sleeves of her simple housekeeping uniform beneath a borrowed black cardigan. She had spent the entire afternoon helping prepare the mansion for the event, making sure every tablecloth rested perfectly flat, every candle burned evenly, every flower arrangement faced the right direction. The gala wasn't her world. It never had been. She only remained because one of the babysitters had canceled unexpectedly, leaving her with no choice except to bring her 6-year-old daughter with her after finishing work. Emily Johnson clutched her mother's hand tightly while her wide brown eyes wandered across the enormous room. To her, everything looked magical. The towering floral displays seemed taller than trees. The polished staircase looked like something from a fairy tale. The musicians in the corners sounded like they belonged inside one of her favorite animated movies. She didn't notice the expensive gowns or designer watches. She noticed balloons tied near the children's charity booth and the giant teddy bear displayed beside the silent auction table. Amara leaned down, smoothing a curl away from Emily's forehead. "Stay close to me, sweetheart," she whispered with the gentle patience only a mother could carry after years of balancing impossible responsibilities. Emily nodded obediently. Although her curious eyes kept drifting toward the tall man, everyone seemed to greet with admiration. She had seen him before, always from a distance inside the mansion where her mother worked. He had smiled politely to the staff, thanked the cooks after long evenings, and once held the front door open for an elderly gardener carrying heavy equipment. Emily didn't know titles like chairman or executive director. She only knew he looked like someone people listened to. As Lorenzo accepted another handshake, his attention briefly shifted across the room. For just a fraction of a second, his eyes met those of the little girl standing beside one of the housekeepers. She smiled instinctively. He offered the smallest nod before returning to the conversation. It lasted no more than a heartbeat. Yet somehow Emily's face brightened as though someone had answered a question she had never spoken aloud. Moments later, while applause echoed after another speech praising generosity and compassion, the little girl's tiny fingers slowly slipped free from her mother's hand. 2 months earlier, the De Luca estate had awakened before sunrise the way it always did, quietly, efficiently, almost like a living machine that never allowed itself to rest. Long before the first executives arrived for breakfast meetings and before luxury cars rolled through the front gates, Amara Johnson was already walking through the service entrance with a reusable lunch bag over one shoulder and Emily's small backpack in her other hand. Every weekday began exactly the same. She would kneel beside her daughter, straighten the little girl's neatly braided hair, kiss her forehead, and leave her at a neighborhood child care center before catching the city bus that carried workers from modest neighborhoods into one of the wealthiest districts outside Chicago. The trip lasted nearly 50 minutes, giving Amara just enough time to calculate bills in her head, answer school emails, and wonder how she could stretch one paycheck into another month. She had become remarkably skilled at making difficult choices look effortless. New shoes for Emily meant postponing replacing her own winter coat. A school field trip meant extra evening shifts cleaning offices downtown. Every sacrifice came with a quiet smile because she never wanted her daughter to feel the weight she carried. Inside the mansion, everyone knew Amara as the housekeeper who never complained. She greeted gardeners by name, remembered every birthday in the staff kitchen, and somehow noticed when someone needed encouragement before they admitted it themselves. Her kindness never felt forced. It was simply the language she had chosen after life had tested her more times than most people ever realized. Lorenzo noticed these things even if he rarely said much. During board meetings, he expected precision, but inside his home, he paid attention to character. He had once watched security footage after a valuable antique vase accidentally shattered in one of the hallways. Instead of blaming the young employee responsible, Amara quietly helped the frightened woman gather every tiny piece before volunteering to stay late and finish both of their assignments. She never asked for recognition. She only wanted the other employee to keep her job. Lorenzo had filed the memory away without mentioning it. Another afternoon, he crossed the kitchen just as the pastry chef apologized for ruining an expensive dessert prepared for important guests. Before anyone else could respond, Amara smiled gently and suggested serving fresh fruit from the estate garden instead. The guests later complimented the simple presentation more enthusiastically than the original menu. Again, she accepted no praise. She returned to polishing silverware as though nothing unusual had happened. There was something about her quiet dignity that lingered in Lorenzo's thoughts longer than he expected. Not because she demanded attention, but because she never tried to earn it. Meanwhile, Emily lived in a world built from much simpler observations. She knew her mother came home exhausted almost every evening, yet somehow still found enough energy to help with homework, read bedtime stories, and laugh at imaginary adventures involving talking squirrels and flying bicycles. She also knew that whenever her mother mentioned Mr. DeLuca, her voice carried respect instead of fear. "He always thanks people," Amara had once said while packing sandwiches for school. "That tells you more about someone than how expensive their house is." Emily remembered those words. Children often measured adults by small moments adults forgot. A smile, a door held open, a thank you spoken sincerely. Without realizing it, the little girl had begun collecting quiet pieces of Lorenzo DeLuca into a picture that looked very different from the one everyone else saw. A week before the charity gala, Emily came home from first grade carrying a sheet of bright blue construction paper decorated with tiny handprints and glitter stars. She held it carefully all the way up the apartment stairs as though it were the most valuable treasure she had ever owned. The moment Amara unlocked the front door, Emily rushed inside and spread the paper across the small kitchen table. At the top, written in cheerful letters by her teacher, were the words, "Father and Family Celebration Day." Every student had been invited to bring a father, grandfather, uncle, or another trusted adult to spend one afternoon at school. There would be games, simple crafts, and photographs that the children could keep forever. Emily's smile faded just enough for Amara to notice. "Can we still go?" she asked quietly. Amara pulled out a chair beside her daughter and sat down with a gentle smile that hid years of practice pretending difficult conversations were easy. "Of course we can," she answered softly. "Families come in many different shapes." Emily nodded, but her little fingers continued tracing the empty line where the name of a guest was supposed to be written. During the following days, she watched other children excitedly describe what they planned to do with their fathers. One classmate said they would race across the playground together. Another proudly explained that her father was taking the afternoon off from work just to attend. Emily smiled whenever someone spoke to her, yet she never joined the conversations. Instead, she folded the invitation carefully every afternoon before placing it back inside her backpack. Her teacher noticed the quiet change, but never pressured her to explain. Children often protected feelings they could not yet describe with words. That weekend, while Amara worked an extra cleaning shift downtown, Emily stayed with Mrs. Evelyn, the elderly neighbor who had become family long ago. Together, they baked chocolate chip cookies in a tiny kitchen filled with the smell of cinnamon and vanilla. As they waited for the cookies to cool, Emily looked out the window and asked a question so innocent that it stopped the older woman in the middle of washing dishes. Do you think someone can borrow a father for just one day? Mrs. Evelyn turned slowly, surprised more by the sadness hidden beneath the question than by the words themselves. She dried her hands with a towel before kneeling beside the little girl. Why would you ask that, sweetheart? Emily shrugged. Because I do not need one forever. Just long enough so everybody knows my mom did not do everything alone. Mrs. Evelyn felt her eyes fill with quiet emotion. She hugged Emily gently without offering an answer she could not honestly give. Later that evening, Amara found her daughter asleep on the couch with the invitation still resting against her chest. She carefully lifted the paper before carrying Emily to bed. The blank line remained empty. Amara stared at it for several seconds before folding it closed again. She whispered a promise into the quiet room that somehow sounded more like a prayer than a sentence. I will figure something out. She believed she was protecting her daughter from disappointment. She never imagined Emily had already begun searching for an answer entirely on her own. The morning of the charity gala arrived wrapped in cool autumn sunlight, and the DeLuca estate moved with the polished rhythm of dozens of people preparing for an evening that would soon fill newspapers and social media feeds across the city. Florists arranged towering white roses beneath sweeping staircases, while caterers carried polished trays through endless hallways scented with fresh cedar and coffee. Amara worked quietly from room to room, checking every detail with the same care she brought to every assignment. Emily spent most of the afternoon in a small staff lounge coloring pictures while waiting for the event to begin. She had promised her mother she would stay inside unless someone came with her, and she kept that promise faithfully. Yet tucked inside the front pocket of her little sweater rested the folded blue invitation from school, now slightly wrinkled from being opened so many times. Every now and then she touched it gently, almost as if reminding herself that the blank line still existed. Late in the afternoon, while delivering fresh towels to the library, Amara paused outside the open doorway after hearing familiar voices. Several board members were speaking with Lorenzo about the foundation's newest scholarship program. One executive praised his leadership, another thanked him for supporting children from families facing financial hardship, and Lorenzo answered each compliment with the same calm humility that always surprised people who expected wealth to create distance. Children should never pay the price for circumstances they did not choose, he said quietly before excusing himself to greet arriving guests. Amara lowered her eyes and continued walking, but those words remained with her longer than she expected. At nearly the same moment, Emily wandered toward a nearby window where she could see volunteers decorating the courtyard with colorful ribbons for the children's charity display. She smiled as several younger guests laughed while chasing bubbles floating across the lawn. Then she noticed Lorenzo crossing the garden alone between meetings. He stopped when an elderly volunteer struggled to carry a heavy box of donated books. Without hesitation, he accepted the box himself, walked it across the courtyard, thanked the volunteer for coming, and returned to his schedule without waiting for applause or photographs. Emily watched the entire exchange through the glass. Nobody else seemed to notice because everyone had already turned back to conversations about business and donations. To her, however, the moment felt enormous. Children often believed actions long before they believed words, and in that quiet exchange, she saw exactly the kind of grown-up she imagined could make another child feel safe. As evening settled over the estate, guests filled the ballroom with elegant conversations and warm laughter while musicians played soft piano melodies beneath sparkling chandeliers. Emily remained beside her mother exactly as promised until one of the event coordinators politely asked Amara to help solve a last-minute seating problem on the opposite side of the room. Stay right here for 1 minute, Amara whispered, kneeling so their eyes met. Do not go anywhere. I will be back before you count to 60. Emily nodded obediently and began counting under her breath. 1, 2, 3. She made it all the way to 38 before her eyes found Lorenzo again across the ballroom, surrounded by smiling adults who seemed to need only a few seconds of his attention before moving aside. Emily looked down at the folded invitation inside her pocket, then back at the man her mother always described as kind. She took one slow breath, released the paper from her pocket, and with the quiet determination only a hopeful child could possess, she started walking through the crowd toward him. The gentle murmur of hundreds of conversations slowly faded as Emily reached the center of the ballroom. She had never stood in front of so many adults before, yet somehow her small steps never faltered. Lorenzo had just finished thanking another donor when he noticed a tiny figure standing patiently beside him instead of pulling at his sleeve or interrupting. She simply waited until he looked down. The moment their eyes met, he recognized the little girl from the estate. Before anyone else could speak, he offered the same respectful smile he would have given any guest. "Hello there," he said warmly. "Did you need something?" Emily nodded once and held the folded blue invitation with both hands. Her voice was soft enough that those closest leaned in to hear, but every word was perfectly clear. "Mr. DeLuca, may I borrow you for one day?" Time seemed to stop without anyone asking it to. The musicians continued playing for only another measure before even they sensed the unusual silence spreading through the ballroom. Conversations dissolved one by one until only the distant sound of silverware from another room remained. Several guests exchanged puzzled glances. A few smiled politely, assuming the child was confused. Others looked toward the housekeeping staff, expecting someone to quietly guide her away before the awkward moment grew larger. Across the room, Amara turned just in time to see her daughter standing before Lorenzo. Every color seemed to leave her face. She hurried forward, weaving carefully through elegantly dressed guests while whispering apologies before she had even reached them. Her heartbeat pounded so loudly she barely heard the orchestra anymore. "Emily," she called gently, trying not to embarrass her daughter. "Sweetheart, come here." Emily looked back at her mother for only a second before returning her attention to Lorenzo. There was no mischief in her expression, no attempt to make people laugh. Only the honest hope that children carried before the world taught them to expect disappointment. She unfolded the invitation with great care and held it where he could read the words printed across the top. "Everyone else has someone coming," she explained quietly. "My mom says families come in different shapes. I was wondering if I could borrow you just for one afternoon." No one laughed now. The innocent sincerity in her voice erased every hint of amusement before it could grow. Amara finally reached her daughter's side, her hands trembling as she knelt beside her. "I am so sorry, sir," she whispered, unable to lift her eyes. "She does not understand. Please forgive us. We will leave immediately." Emily's shoulders lowered slightly, realizing for the first time that her question might have caused trouble for the person she loved most. She lowered the invitation toward the floor and softly added, "I did not want to be a problem. I just wanted someone to come with me so my mom would not feel sad." Those simple words settled over the room with a weight no speech could have carried. Lorenzo remained completely still. He did not answer immediately. He did not glance toward his board members or the photographers waiting nearby. Instead, his attention rested only on the little girl clutching a folded piece of blue paper and the mother whose greatest fear was not losing her job, but allowing her daughter to lose hope. The silence stretched for several long seconds, and somehow it spoke louder than anything anyone in the ballroom could have said. Lorenzo slowly lowered himself to one knee until he was at eye level with Emily, and the movement alone seemed to release the tension that had frozen the ballroom. He did not speak immediately. Instead, he accepted the folded blue invitation with both hands, treating the simple sheet of construction paper with the same respect he would have shown an important business contract. His eyes moved carefully across the handwritten words before returning to the hopeful little face in front of him. "You asked if you could borrow me for one day," he said gently. "May I ask why you chose me?" Emily looked at him with complete honesty. "Because my mom says you always thank people. Good people remember to say thank you." A faint smile appeared on Lorenzo's face, the kind that reached his eyes before anyone noticed it on his lips. Around them, the room remained perfectly still. Amara could barely breathe. She wanted to apologize again, to explain that Emily had imagined this without permission, but something in Lorenzo's calm expression encouraged her to remain silent. Emily continued in the soft, thoughtful voice only children possessed. "The paper says I can bring someone who makes me feel safe. I thought maybe you could come because you make my mom smile when she talks about work instead of looking worried." Amara covered her mouth with trembling fingers. She had never realized her daughter paid attention to such small details. Lorenzo glanced toward Amara for only a moment. He remembered every quiet act of kindness she had shown inside the estate. Every time she had chosen compassion over convenience, never expecting anyone to notice. Now he understood where Emily had learned to see the good in people. He looked back at the invitation and quietly asked, "When is family day?" Emily answered immediately, "Next Friday after lunch. We paint pictures and play games. It only lasts a little while. You would not have to stay all day." Several guests lowered their eyes, suddenly uncomfortable with how easily the child had measured time. She was not asking for forever. She was asking for one afternoon. Lorenzo folded the invitation carefully and handed it back to her. "Emily," he said, his voice steady and warm. "Thank you for asking me instead of assuming I would say yes." She blinked with quiet surprise. Adults rarely thanked children for asking questions. He smiled again. "And because you asked so politely, my answer is yes." For one unforgettable second, Emily simply stared at him, as though she needed to make certain she had heard correctly. Then her entire face brightened with pure joy. She threw both hands over her mouth before whispering, "Really?" Lorenzo nodded once. "Really? I will clear my schedule for Friday afternoon." A soft gasp spread across the ballroom. Board members exchanged astonished glances. Several guests instinctively applauded before realizing no announcement had been made. Others quietly wiped away tears they had not expected to shed at a formal charity gala. Amara felt her knees weaken. "Sir, you truly do not have to do this," she said, her voice shaking with gratitude and embarrassment. Lorenzo rose slowly and answered with the same calm sincerity that had defined every decision he respected. "No, Amara, I do not have to. I want to. Some invitations are too meaningful to decline." In that quiet moment, beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers and surrounded by people who had spent the evening celebrating generosity, everyone present witnessed what genuine kindness actually looked like. The following Friday arrived with bright blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of freshly cut grass across Maple Grove Elementary School. Children raced across the playground with boundless excitement, while colorful banners welcomed families to the annual celebration. Teachers arranged craft supplies on long folding tables, volunteers set out lemonade and homemade cookies, and parents filled the courtyard with cheerful conversations. Emily stood near the front entrance wearing her favorite yellow dress, the one her mother had carefully ironed before sunrise. She held Amara's hand tightly, trying to appear patient even though every few seconds she glanced toward the parking lot. Amara smiled encouragingly, but inside she wondered whether someone as busy as Lorenzo could truly find time to honor such an unusual promise. She would never have blamed him if an emergency meeting or unexpected obligation had forced him to cancel. 5 minutes before the event officially began, a simple black sedan quietly entered the school parking lot. There was no long line of luxury vehicles, no photographers, no grand entrance. Lorenzo stepped out wearing dark blue slacks, a light gray sweater, and comfortable brown shoes instead of the tailored suits everyone expected. He carried no briefcase. In one hand, he held a small paper gift bag decorated with colorful balloons. Emily recognized him instantly. Before Amara could say a word, the little girl smiled so brightly that several nearby parents turned to see what had captured her attention. Lorenzo walked toward them with the same calm expression he carried everywhere, yet there was something noticeably different about him today. He was not arriving as the host of a gala or the leader of a foundation. He was simply a guest who had kept his word. "Good afternoon," he greeted them warmly. "I hope I am not late." Emily shook her head so quickly that her braids bounced against her shoulders. "You came." Her voice was filled with joyful disbelief. Lorenzo smiled. "I said I would." He handed her the gift bag. Inside rested a brand new box of colored pencils, a sketchbook with a blue cover, and a handwritten note that read, "Every great story begins with imagination. Keep creating yours." Emily carefully traced the words with one finger before looking back at him with shining eyes. "Nobody ever wrote me a note before," she whispered. The school principal soon welcomed everyone and invited each child to introduce the adult who had come with them. One by one, students proudly pointed toward fathers, grandfathers, older brothers, and family friends. When it became Emily's turn, she stood a little taller than usual. "This is Mr. Lorenzo," she announced proudly. "I asked if I could borrow him for today, and he said yes." A soft ripple of smiles moved through the crowd. There was no confusion, only warmth. Throughout the afternoon, they painted colorful pictures side by side, built a cardboard birdhouse during the craft activity, and laughed through a three-legged relay race that neither of them managed to win. Lorenzo discovered that Emily celebrated every small success as though it were the greatest achievement in the world. She clapped when another team crossed the finish line first. She thanked volunteers after every activity. She even complimented another child's painting before showing anyone her own. Watching her, Lorenzo quietly recognized the unmistakable reflection of Amara's gentle character. Sometimes the greatest lessons children learn were not taught with words at all. They were simply lived every single day by someone who loved them. As the afternoon drew to a close, families gathered beneath a large oak tree where teachers prepared to hand every child a framed photograph from the celebration. Laughter floated through the school courtyard, but Lorenzo found himself lingering a few steps behind the crowd, watching Emily skip across the grass while proudly showing her birdhouse to another student. There was something quietly extraordinary about the way she found happiness in the smallest moments. She did not compare herself to anyone else. She simply appreciated what she had been given. Amara walked over carrying 3 paper cups of lemonade. "Thank you again," she said softly. "I still cannot believe you came." Lorenzo accepted the drink with a grateful smile. "I am beginning to think I should be thanking both of you instead." Amara looked at him with quiet surprise. Before she could respond, Emily hurried over and carefully slipped a folded piece of notebook paper into Lorenzo's hand. "I forgot," she said. "I made this before the gala, but I never gave it to you." Lorenzo unfolded the paper slowly. The handwriting was uneven, with several words carefully erased and rewritten, but every sentence carried the unmistakable honesty of a child. It read, "Dear Mr. DeLuca, my teacher says we should invite someone who makes us feel brave. My mom is always brave, but she says she has to work that day. I wanted to ask you because you always smile at people who work hard. If you cannot come, I will understand because grown-ups are busy. I hope you have a happy day anyway. Thank you for saying thank you to my mom." Lorenzo read the letter twice before lowering it. For several quiet moments, he could not find the right words. Throughout his career, he had received awards engraved in crystal, letters from public officials, and invitations to prestigious events across the country. Yet nothing had ever carried the quiet sincerity of the folded sheet now resting in his hands. He looked toward Amara. "She wrote this before she ever asked me." Amara nodded gently. "She never told me. I found out only after the gala that she had been thinking about family day for weeks." Emily looked down at her shoes. "I did not want Mommy to worry if you said no." Lorenzo felt something shift deep inside him. Success had taught him how to solve complicated problems, negotiate difficult agreements, and build organizations that served thousands of people. Yet standing in that elementary school courtyard, he realized that the greatest act of trust anyone had ever placed in him had come from a 6-year-old little girl who believed kindness was reason enough to ask for help. The principal called everyone together for one final group photograph. Parents and children lined up shoulder to shoulder while volunteers adjusted the rows. Without hesitation, Emily reached for Lorenzo's hand. He looked down briefly before gently holding hers. The camera captured dozens of smiling faces, but Lorenzo barely noticed the flash. His thoughts remained fixed on one simple truth. Buildings could be purchased, businesses could be expanded, reputations could be earned over decades. But moments like this could never be bought. They could only be accepted with humility when life quietly placed them in your hands. As the applause faded and families began gathering their belongings, Lorenzo folded Emily's letter with great care and slipped it into the inside pocket of his sweater, already knowing it was a keepsake he would carry far longer than anyone could possibly imagine. 1 year passed more quickly than anyone expected. Seasons changed, children grew taller, and life continued with its familiar rhythm. Yet some promises quietly became traditions. On another bright Friday afternoon, Maple Grove Elementary once again welcomed families for its annual celebration. Teachers decorated the halls with colorful artwork, parents filled the sidewalks with cheerful conversations, and children waited excitedly for the special people they loved most. Emily was now 7 years old, a little taller, a little more confident, but she still wore the same joyful smile that had once transformed an elegant ballroom into a place of unexpected kindness. This time she stood near the school entrance without clutching an invitation or wondering whether someone would come. She already knew the answer. At exactly 1 o'clock, the familiar black sedan pulled into the parking lot. Lorenzo stepped out wearing another simple sweater instead of a business suit, carrying nothing more than a small backpack filled with art supplies Emily had once mentioned she liked. Several teachers recognized him immediately, not because of newspaper articles or charitable foundations, but because he had quietly returned exactly as he promised. He greeted every volunteer by name when he could, thanked the cafeteria staff for preparing lunch, and shook hands with the crossing guard before entering the building. There were no cameras waiting outside and no public announcements celebrating his arrival. None was needed. Emily spotted him through the front doors and ran across the hallway with the unmistakable excitement only children possess. She stopped just long enough to remember her manners before wrapping him in a warm hug. "I knew you would come," she said with complete confidence. Lorenzo smiled gently. "I would not miss it." Amara watched from nearby, her eyes filled with quiet gratitude. During the past year, nothing extraordinary had happened in dramatic headlines. Lorenzo had never tried to replace anyone in Emily's life, and Amara had never asked for anything beyond the kindness already shown. Instead, something far more meaningful had taken shape. Every few weeks, Lorenzo would send Emily a new book with a handwritten note, encouraging her curiosity. Sometimes he recommended museums, sometimes science exhibits, sometimes simply reminded her to keep drawing and asking thoughtful questions. Emily, in return, mailed him colorful pictures, school essays, and birthday cards filled with cheerful misspellings that always made him smile. Their connection had never been built on obligation. It had been built on consistency. As the afternoon ended, the principal thanked every family for attending and spoke about the many forms love, guidance, and encouragement could take. Looking across the room, she noticed Lorenzo helping children clean paintbrushes while Amara laughed with other parents, and Emily proudly showed her newest artwork to anyone willing to look. It was an ordinary scene, yet somehow it carried extraordinary meaning. The people gathered there did not remember the expensive gala where everything had begun. They remembered the simple choice that followed it. A child had found the courage to ask. A man had found the humility to listen. A mother had discovered that dignity grows stronger when kindness is received instead of refused. As sunlight poured through the classroom windows and laughter echoed down the hallway, it became clear that the greatest gifts rarely arrived wrapped in ribbons or measured by wealth. They arrived through ordinary moments, quiet promises faithfully kept, and hearts willing to make room for someone else's hope. And on that beautiful afternoon, everyone present remembered what true dignity, compassion, and family could look like.